the withdrawals, that demographic.
Yeah. Could be Whitehall.
Yeah.
Well, they all picked up the Whitehall brochure.
Oh, okay.
So quiet.
It's 5:59. Yeah, a minute to go.
It is 6 o'clock. We're calling the meeting to order. Please join me in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So glad that you're here this evening. We welcome you. At this time, we will have our town manager's comments.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just a quick review of your consent agenda this evening. You have a waiver, as discussed by Engineer Mickle at last week's agenda meeting, from the Code of Ordinances relative to a water line extension to a single-family dwelling that is to be built. Item B then is the approval of your local water supply. This is something council does each and every year as a requirement under North Carolina general statutes. You're authorizing the mayor to execute a contract with Forvis, and this is for the purpose of doing the audit once we close the books on this particular fiscal year, which will occur on June the 30th. And then finally, your town council meeting minutes from your business meeting and work session of last month. 3 public hearings this evening, although the first one, as the agenda notes, there has been a request for postponement on that and for it to come back next month. So when we arrive at that point on the agenda, I would simply ask that council open the hearing and continue it to June the 13th. And then we will discuss the Whitehall Master Plan in public hearing, potentially followed by a vote of the council to approve that master plan, and then the fiscal year proposed budget. And that will be the first of 2 public hearings on the budget. We will look to adopt it on June 13th of next month. And then finally, under action items, you have 2 vacant planning board positions to appoint, consideration of 2 separate architectural reviews, one being Creston Commons, which is simply a rehab of the exterior of an existing facility, and then an additional rick house at the American Whiskey Company, BHOC, out on Yadkin Road. And that is your agenda this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. This time, we'll open for public comments. We will remind everyone that you have 3 minutes and that you should not go into the areas of the public hearings that will be discussed later. But any other thing on your mind, please come up, let us know who it is you are, where you're from, and we'll listen.
There will be a chance to address the issues later on the agenda.
Yes.
Right. So you address it at the time that it comes up.
But at this time, public comments.
Oh, I'm confused. So if I have public comments about something that's going to be discussed later tonight, I should wait.
If it's under the number 7 action items, then speak now.
Now is the time, yeah.
Now is the time? Good evening, council. My name is Karen Tusing, and I live in Southern Pines in Knollwood Heights neighborhood. I just want to clarify that I'm not like a person who's against the BHOC distillery. I have concerns about its size and also not being fully informed because I only get what's in the newspaper. I don't get probably what you get I have some concerns, and wrote it down, but I couldn't print it, so. My concern is about something known as whiskey fungus. It's probably something that wasn't really widely known a few years ago, but it's been in the news in 2023. Whiskey fungus is Baudonia compniacensis, and it's a problem associated with ethanol vapors breathing from the barrels of whiskey and other alcohol distillers. This black fungus coats buildings, trees, playgrounds, signs, and even cars near distilleries. It can be cleaned, but it's nearly impossible to eradicate when it's near a distillery. This is because ethanol in vapor form accelerates the growth and stimulates spore germination. The amount and distance of whiskey fungus outside of distilleries typically correlates to the number of barrels stored. For example, fungus is found in neighborhoods that are less than a mile from small distilleries, but up to 3 miles from very large distilleries. BHawk wants to be a medium size. I really don't know what that means in terms of numbers of barrels, but the spread of whiskey fungus may be reduced if the BHawk company employs preventive measures, such as the use of closed as opposed to open-air storage buildings known as rick houses, and the installation of ethanol capturing equipment. This is something not required by law in our state because our state is pretty new to distillery business. But it is something that responsible distilleries are employing in other locations where they have concerns for their communities. Before the Southern Pines Town Council votes to give the additional permits being requested for whiskey storage buildings on the BHawk campus, I would like to ask the following questions. Has the town council already required BHawk Company to prevent the spread of this fungus to areas adjacent to its property? Has the BHawk Company provided assurances that they will install the necessary equipment to prevent the spread of whiskey fungus outside of its buildings? Will the town of Southern Pines conduct regular testing for whiskey fungus within the community? Will the BHawk Company redress the issue if whiskey fungus is found on buildings, trees, playgrounds, and/or other objects within our community?
Thank you so very much for sharing. Any other thoughts or reflections before we move ahead to the next person? Okay. Anyone else? Public comments? If not, we'll move ahead now to the consent agenda. And, yes, sir.
Well, I'm just coming up for the consent agenda items, if there's any questions.
Well, we have them there with one vote of,
James, when I was looking over the local water supply plan, I didn't have my calculator close by. So the growth that's projected in that, is it approximately what we've been growing at? It's like a 1.6, 1.7% growth per year?
That's pretty close. The state, we don't populate that number. The state does that with some back-end calculation that they do. So it may not be exactly what we would calculate if we ran like census population data, but that sounds relatively close.
Okay. I was trying to do the math in my head, and it looks like it's close, but being that the CLRP, Matt Newcastle, who's working on that, brought up that we are growing faster than North Carolina. In general. Let's just make a note that next time we review it, that we do double-check the growth.
Yeah, I will add that that figure would be consistent with about 5 to 6 decades of decade-over-decade growth, somewhere in the 1.5% to 2% rate. I believe when Matt had made reference to that, and you may recall the evening that we were here looking at A through E or whatever, some of that was based on 1% growth, some of it was based on 2% growth because of that range. The state as a whole, we are growing faster than the state on average. It's very easy because we're so close to it to think about the explosive growth just north of here and certainly in MEC, but there are other areas of the state that are actually losing population. So our figure of 1.5% to 2% is better than average. But the state using that, it would probably just be because baseline-wise, that's where we've been at for a very, very long time.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Any other discussion before we get a vote?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second?
Okay. And the council?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. Now, the first public hearing, as was mentioned earlier, will be opened and actually continued. So
Do we have to
is
formally
there?
do that? I can do it. So as to PD 02-23, per the town manager's comments, I'll make a motion to continue that hearing until our June 13th, 2023 meeting.
Second.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Okay, thank you so much. All right. Now the public hearing for the Whitehall Master Plan.
Okay, since you heard most of our presentation, I think we'll maybe turn this way.
That's great.
Thank you.
Well, good evening. It's nice to see so many of you who have been with us during this process of putting together the master plan. I'm Jessica Roth. I'm the Assistant Town Manager, and with me is Cindy King, Parks and Recreation Director. And we've got about a 10-minute presentation or so that we're going to give before we open up the public comment.
Just press the right side.
We just wanted to open up and thank the community for your extensive involvement and input that you've given us in this master plan. We've held a series of 2 meetings that have been attended by over 100 people. We've had 2 different online surveys that over 800 people have participated in. We've also had lots of you reach out through phone and email, and then we have a number of different individuals and groups. And then, of course, we've had CPL and Creech guiding us with on the professional level. Just very briefly, these are the steps and kind of the timeline that we've taken. We started this back in July with the data collection, inventorying our parks. We had our first public meeting on August 23rd, and that was when we opened the first online survey that nearly 700 people participated in. And then we did our stakeholder meetings. We then moved on to the draft recommendations, and at that point, if you remember the January meeting where we had 3 different concept plans that were presented, kind of a low, moderate, higher intensity of passive recreation. We then opened up another online survey to get feedback on those plans. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more, but we did meet with the Three Rivers Land Trust at that point. Since then, we've been taking that feedback that we received on the 3 plans, and we've refined a master plan, which is what we'll present tonight. We've done some cost estimating, and then we presented this to the town council back in late April, and we are here tonight for our last couple steps, the public hearing, and we'll proceed to adoption at some point. So just to clarify the earlier steps that we built on, confirming the community preferences, again, through that online survey, the land trust approval. We've done some architectural concepts, which we're going to show you. We will continue next with doing some construction drawings. That's actually proposed in our budget that the council's considering tonight with the first public hearing. We're also moving forward with managing the land. There's, 157 acres takes a lot of care. We've been working on the red-cockaded woodpecker habitats. We have a new roof that actually is going on the house right now. We've partnered with the Convention and Visitors Bureau. We've been hiding pine cones out there. The Whitehall Book Club meets out there. We have Library, Parks, and Rec. So we've been gradually opening the property up and using it for programming that makes sense. So now Cindy is going to talk about some high-level elements.
We had 3 goals with 1 plan. The 3 goals were resource preservation, passive recreation, and publicly accessible. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in just a moment. This is just one of the quotes. Parks and trails are for the people. We can provide the functional facilities needed by the public without compromising the natural features of Whitehall. And this has been one of our focuses as we've progressed through this process. So the resource preservation, you'll see there's several different elements in there. The longleaf pine and the RCW preserve that Jessica mentioned. We have, we want to capitalize on the infrastructure at Reservoir and Elizabeth Rounds and use some of those resources rather than creating more construction out there. The pond restoration to attract the waterfowl. We've got the Pecan Grove. We're going to be maintaining that. The master plan was approved by the Three Rivers Land Trust, and like Jessica said, she's going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. And then the trail system, it's going to provide a burn trail so that we can do prescribed burns without upsetting anything more so than what we want. The passive recreation, we've got 5 miles of trails, open fields for picnics, kite flying, and free play, picnic area and shelter, the wildflower meadow, and then the environmental education component. For the public accessibility, we're going to use the parking lots at Reservoir Park and PD Road, the existing PD Road lot. We're looking at doing an ADA accessible 2-mile trail. That's going to be the perimeter trail that you'll see in some pictures that we're going to show. Renovate the barn and carriage house for programming and public use. Connectivity to the other parks and trails, i.e. Reservoir Park. Community garden opportunity. We've got lots of land, so hoping to get some community garden aspects out there. And then access for the emergency vehicles. And you'll see more about this when we show some other slides.
So I wanted to briefly touch on the conservation easement. That's been discussed at a number of our public meetings. But the previous landowners, before they sold it to the town, they put about 40% of the 157 acres in a conservation easement, which is held by the Three Rivers Land Trust, and that's the reason we keep mentioning them. And that's really important because that conservation easement, it transfers with any landowner. None of us are able to do anything to take that easement off, and it permanently protects those 66 acres so that it cannot be, you cannot take the trees down, you cannot disturb it. It does allow us to open up those areas for public use with some trails and things like that. And the Three Rivers Land Trust, and their responsibility, they come out and periodically monitor the easement to make sure that we're following the restrictions for it. And probably what's most important is that the most critical habitats out there are within this easement, and that includes the red-cockaded woodpecker habitats and the longleaf pine stands. So knowing this, I met along with Mac Kane, our landscape architect. We met with the Three Rivers Land Trust back in January, and we presented our different master plan elements because we wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with them before we moved forward with putting them into a master plan. And they have actually signed off and give us written approval on the master plan that you're going to see here shortly. And just some of the things that we've done to be sensitive to the easement and to comply with our restrictions. All of the trails are going to be designed around the trails or around the trees and natural features. So you're going to see trails meandering around. We're not taking trees down in order to construct trails. The perimeter trails are going to have pervious paving and boardwalks. This is actually an example here in this photo of pervious paving. That is an asphalt type material, but it is a hard surface and the water and the air can get through it. And so this is a much better surface than your standard concrete or even your standard impervious asphalt. And this is a paving solution that they were good with in the conservation easements. Also, by focusing these hard surface trails on the perimeter of the property, the vast majority of Whitehall on the interior is going to look very much like it does now. You know, we won't need to install new trails or anything like that. We will only be removing trees and underbrush if it's dead, dying, diseased, if we need to do land management. We'll be capitalizing on the existing dirt trails and roads in order to form future trails so that we can minimize disturbance, use their layout, and just continue with that. And one of the things that we really like about the plan is that by using the hard surface, it is a pervious material, but it is a hard surface, and that will allow this to be ADA accessible, which this is the first trail in Southern Pines that will be ADA accessible, which is wonderful. And it's also, of course, friendly for people in strollers or, you know, who just have other needs like that. So this is the final master plan concept, and I know it's really hard to see, so Cindy now is going to focus on some kind of blown up views of it with some photographs so you can understand it a little better. I'm going to get a little bit closer because my glasses are not.
When you wear bifocals, it's tough. So Whitehall's trail network is laid out to create controlled burn zones. As I mentioned earlier, fire is necessary for the longleaf pines to thrive. The perimeter trail, as you saw in the big map that Jessica just went off of, the big perimeter trail is the red one. It's going to provide those fire breaks for the adjoining properties. Obviously, the perimeter multi-purpose trail is in B, and I'll kind of go flip back and forth. You'll see the B right here. And then C is the longleaf pine preserve, and it's going to be documented right here. And then the east side nature trails is D, and they're right here. They're the purple. You'll see reservoir parking, the entrance parking, and then again the perimeter multipurpose trail. As I mentioned, parking will be added near the entrance of Reservoir Park. This will not only limit the disturbance on the Whitehall land, but also provide the additional parking to serve Reservoir Park, which is much needed. This parking lot will provide easy access to the perimeter loop trail and all the nature trails as well. So we're trying to use our existing resources. And then we're referring to Whitehall at Reservoir Park. So that's why we've put that up there. Obviously, we've mentioned that the longleaf pine forest and the red cockaded woodpeckers will be preserved and protected. I don't know if you've been out there lately, but we've already started doing some clearing for the woodpeckers, which it looks beautiful. I mean, hopefully you'll get to see some of those. And as I mentioned, parking, restrooms, and the playground at Elizabeth Rounds will serve Whitehall, avoiding the need for additional construction and disturbance. The center of the property is largely left in its existing state, like Jessica said. with the barn, Pecan Grove, and the open space lawns. Enhancements can include a wildflower meadow, a picnic area, fruit orchard, and the nature trails. So you'll see those kind of interdispersed in the middle there. So in our survey, we heard everyone loud and clear, thank you, but no thanks. 67% did not want primitive campsites, and 59% did not want to see an adventure ropes course. So we have steered away from that concept. And those are some of the quotes that we received from our surveys. I know Southern Pines really wanted mountain bike trails, but we decided, and everyone spoke, and that we're not putting mountain bike trails out there. So hopefully we will find a good location for mountain bike trails, but it will not be at Reservoir, or Whitehall, excuse me.
So on these next slides here, I'm going to show you some of the architectural concepts, and these are definitely new from the January meeting, and we've got some beautiful concepts here. This, of course, is the barn, and we've got a couple different options here. I mean, we can simply do some minor upgrades and use it for much-needed parks and recreation storage, or this view obviously shows what a full renovation would look like, and that would allow us to use it as a gathering space for town events. We could use it to rent out for private activities, functions. We heard from the community that there's a need for small weddings or parties, things like that. We can add restrooms to serve park users and people attending the barn. At this point, we don't know which direction we're going to go. Obviously, cost is a huge decision here, but we do have the ability to go with either of those or somewhere in between, just depending. Those are future decisions to be made. And here's some other views of the barn, including the exterior as it could look if it had that full renovation and upgrade. Another view of the barn, and that kind of exterior patio area is really a nice function to add some additional outdoor gathering. The carriage house is one that we are interested in moving forward, and in the FY 23-24 budget, we do have money planned to do the architectural plans for the carriage house renovation. And the plan here is that it gets a full upgrade renovation so that it can serve not only for parks and recreation and library programming, but it also can serve as kind of a welcoming entry point for people who come to Whitehall. Maybe this is where you come get your trail guides, different things like this. We also envision that this would be a private rental space. So if you wanted to have a party, a shower, something like this, we would add this to our list of available rentals. And you can see you'd have a beautiful new space there. We would add a very, very small amount of parking back behind there. I think it's like 10 spaces that are proposed just for people who are specifically coming there. And you would enter that parking lot through a new road coming from Elizabeth Rounds Park. And then lastly, the main house. At this point, as I mentioned, we have opened up the house for some small-scale library and recreation programming. We have a book club that meets there. We've done a canning class. We've done foraging classes. The bottom is storytelling out there at Halloween. And you'll see we're going to continue to program small-scale programs there. And that'll be in our summer recreation guide if you haven't seen that. Long term, we don't quite know yet what we're going to do with the house. We haven't had any of those discussions yet. We'll continue to keep it maintained, but we don't have any plans for opening it up beyond this at this point. It will take significant accessibility and code upgrades to further open it up, so that's one reason. At this point, Cindy's going to give you some information that kind of tells you why we've landed on the name Whitehall at Reservoir Park, which is key to the branding.
I've done a little research in the last few weeks, and we have landed at the 5th largest municipal owned parks, or one of the largest municipal owned parks in North Carolina. You'll see how we compare. I don't know if you're familiar with any of these. possibly Dorothea Dix, which is in Raleigh. We are bigger than Dorothea Dix. We came in at 4th. The other ones are in Butner, Greenville, and Durham. And if you look at the population, we're standing pretty good with a large park. So it's a pretty good feather in our cap, if I do say so myself. This is a quote, or the information for Reservoir, which includes Whitehall. It totals 326 acres, owned by the town of Southern Pines, and it's a gem in Sandhills. A 95-acre lake and permanently protected longleaf pine stands in habitats for the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker showcase the park's natural beauty. Passive recreation activities include an 18-acre disc golf course, playground, and exercise stations. Over 7 acres of trails connect to the Southern Pines Greenway network. The town offers, like Jessica said, recreation and library programs in the Whitehall House, Carriage House, and the barn will be our goal. Private rental spaces and picnic shelters are available for the community use. Reservoir Park is the biggest park in Moore County and the largest municipal-owned park south of the Triangle. Again, just a feather in our cap. I'm pretty proud of that.
So just the last few things here before we close out our presentation. We wanted to, since we opened up with kind of the path that we've taken to get to tonight, we want to let you know where we're going from this point forward. I kind of briefly mentioned the land management, which we're already doing. As Cindy mentioned, we've done some clearing in the RCW habitat, and I don't want you to be alarmed by that clearing because it is not what you might think of traditional clearing. This, our Parks and Recreation crew actually worked with the Sandhills Ecological Institute, and they had actually been begging us for a little while to do some clearing. If you don't know much about the longleaf pines, you know, they are trees that when you see a very healthy, natural longleaf pine forest, you really only see the longleaf pines and maybe some very small undergrowth. They do not do well when other trees grow up, you know, kind of understory trees, you know, some of your dogwoods or even maples, things like that. They actually harm the longleaf pines because they need a lot of room. And the other thing is as those trees start growing up, they are very, very dangerous to the RCW nests because they can actually poke the nests, and it actually can invite predators to get up closer to the nests. One reason that the RCWs use the longleaf pines is because all of the sap that comes down, it keeps predators from coming up the trees. So if you're allowing other trees to jump up or to grow close and predators to get up there, that's harmful. So the Sandhills Ecological Institute said, please come out and take some of these trees down. So we did. And that's kind of the first step. If you have the trees growing up, you got to do some of that mechanical clearing before you can do the controlled burn. So that is our first step so we can get to the controlled burn. As we mentioned before, fire is critical for the longleaf pines. They need it to thrive. It's not a scary thing. And so going forward, we will look to future burns. We're going to be developing forest management plans. We're going to start working soon on the pecan orchard. It does need some pruning and some fertilization so that we can get those trees in a little bit better health. And then we are going to be working very soon to get wildflower meadows planted. And that's not only because it'll be very beautiful, but also it will help the town. We mow a lot out there. It's an expensive endeavor to keep that mowed. So we hope that by planting the meadows, we can actually reduce our mowing costs and have something very attractive. I've mentioned a few times, we're going to start July 1st on preparing the construction drawings, the architectural drawings. Our goal, if you are familiar with the term shovel ready, we want to be shovel ready by July 1st of 2024. We think that that's really critical because there's a lot of grants that we're going to try to pursue for the construction of Whitehall. And it's very positive when we are reviewed for grants if we can show that we're shovel ready because it means we're ready to use their money. So we'll do a lot of research over the next year on funding so that hopefully when we're looking at the budget next year, we'll understand what might be available. Phase 1 construction, we've put it to be determined. We don't know exactly when it will begin, but those would be the next steps. And then we just want to close out with a quote here. If you've followed any of our presentations or the website, you probably haven't heard this before, or you've probably heard this before, but we feel like this was our goal from day one, and I think this master plan accomplishes it very well. Wholesale alterations to the land destroy natural beauty. As a community, we are stewards of the Whitehall land just as the owners before us were. This property does not need or deserve major alterations that will destroy its natural beauty and habitat. Therefore, we will tread lightly as we enhance the property for public passive recreation uses. And so we still have all of the information, including this presentation, the final master plan concept. There's also a written narrative that supports the concept drawings that you saw tonight. That is all on the project website, which you can access there or by scanning the QR code. And at this point, we are ready to open it up for public comment, unless the mayor and council have any questions of us.
Any questions of council?
But I wanted to mention, people who are scared of QR codes, please direct them, right,
There below.
please direct them on how to get to this information online. Everything's available online. I think that's a really important fact. So talk to us all like maybe we don't like QR codes.
Just while you're saying that, I do want to say I really appreciate the QR code there and on the budget.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, it's great.
For people who use them, it is a really easy link to find something. Yes. Thank you.
Right.
Happy to give you a quick link.
Paper menu at the restaurant.
Those who
Generational.
don't like QR codes or might not know how to use them, if you enter in that exact web address right there, sopinesnc.info/Whitehall, that will take you to our project page. If you're not familiar with QR codes, if you just open up the camera function on your phone and then just kind of aim it at that QR code, you'll see, or at least on my iPhone anyway, I can't speak for Androids, it'll kind of pop up and say open in Chrome, and if you tap that open in Chrome, it'll open. So hopefully either of those options will get
And
you
can
there.
folks get to that by going simply to the Southern Pines town website?
And
There'll be a
that will
link.
direct
That was,
them
that was
right
actually
there.
my point I was looking for there. So anybody who goes onto the Town of Southern Pines website will be able to hit a link to be able to get to all this information, including, I see a lot of people getting out their cameras and taking pictures of the slideshow, but the slideshow you have just presented will
already
be
there.
available there. It's already
They're there
up,
now.
right?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
and this is a link directly to our website. It's just a much shorter link so that, if people are writing it down, you don't have to write down southernpines.net/.
And the other, a couple comments just to the public. I think that the peripheral trail is going to be pretty important just for the need to do burns, which I understand how important that is to our native plants and the ability to do that. So I appreciate the foresight and the planning in that regard. I also think it's really important, I've come to recognize the importance of it being called Whitehall at Reservoir Park because it puts us in line for a lot of grants that normally we would not be able to acquire, but because it's more acreage, if we combine those two, it puts us in a pretty good status statewide. We may be small, but we're mighty, so that's really good. I also think people are going to be concerned about, and I want to make sure that they heard you correctly, there is currently no budget to renovate the barn.
That is correct.
And so right now, the only renovation that, as far as buildings go, would be Carriage House. And that is a very, go ahead.
There is no budget to renovate the carriage house. In the budget that y'all will be voting on June 13th, there is money to do the architectural drawings to renovate the carriage house. So-
Correct, okay. So, and the house, there's nothing specifically designed for the house. I think that's important for everybody to hear again. Although I will say at our budget meeting, that was last month, that lasted days, but it was all packed into one day of fun. It was really interesting. We were at the fire station, and there was a youth cooking class taking place in the kitchen at the fire station. So I think probably Whitehall will offer another summer camp opportunity, ability for kids to have an enhanced experience. And that's really, I'm just sort of reiterating things that have come to my mind as we've gone through this lengthy process. And I wanted to compliment both of you on a presentation well done. You also both look really great tonight. Yeah, kicking it. Thanks.
It's something that didn't come up last week. The pervious surface, because it's a breathable surface, does it require more upkeep than other trails would?
It just kind of depends, not necessarily with the pervious asphalt. And there are some options if we find that we do need to do some upkeep. And then part of that trail will be boardwalk as well, because there are some water, there's some water out there, and that's how we'll cross the water. So there's different types of pervious treatments, and some of them do require more maintenance than others.
Okay. And I suppose when we do the drawings or the plan that's shovel-ready, we'll have sort of long-term idea of what maintenance would be.
Absolutely.
Okay.
To sort of piggyback on what Ann was saying, not only is nothing budgeted for any of the building improvements, my understanding is nothing is budgeted yet for any of the trails. Because we've got to get the first plan, and it's really expensive. So we've got to see where things are, budget-wise, grant-wise. So I just don't want anybody to think that if this approves tonight, tomorrow, all this stuff's going to start happening, because we're a long way from that, and we need to be good stewards of funds along the way, so.
I would offer a caveat simply because it's a public hearing that we have budgeted for the continued maintenance of what is out there. It's just nothing budgeted for new trails or anything. So it's not, we're going to let it just grow over what is already out there.
Long-term plan. This is not, even if we got a grant, it's not something that happens all at once. This is years of work.
And the great thing about the construction drawings that we're doing, they're not going to have like a expiring shelf life. If it's 5 years before we do anything, we'll pull them out in 5 years. So yeah, but if we get some great grant next year, those perimeter trails, they currently have a cost estimate of about $1.3 million, because it's over 2 miles, and that's a lot of work. It's a lot of ground to cover. So if we get some fantastic grant next year that helps us move forward, hopefully we will move forward earlier. If we don't, then we'll have other decisions to make, and we can pull those plans out when we're ready. But yeah, just to reiterate, the only thing that council is being asked to approve at this point is the concept plan that outlines a long-term vision for Whitehall, and then they'll continue to have policy decisions ahead of them about when and how they fund improvements and how they open up the park and that type of thing.
For request for adoption is that with many grant programs, they will ask for an approved plan. So.
Right.
But I do think the other thing that's really important to keep sight of, and Paul can speak to this too, but I think the most important thing that everybody's kept their eye on is resource preservation, and the fact that we're not wanting to tear everything up and recreate. Whitehall is and has been for decades this wonderful environmentally protected site, originally the home of Dave Drexel. I know that Paul got dragged out there with a group of kids and did some canoeing, I think, as a child.
Sunfish sailboats. Yeah.
And I have done the exercise that is very difficult across the lake, back and forth with puzzles, and enjoyed a great friendship with Dave Drexel. So I think that he is smiling down, saying, yes, resource preservation. And I think that's really important that we hang on to that. We have something extraordinary, and I hope that we hold on to it. I think that's the most important thing.
No, I'm really proud of the plan, because, while we mentioned that 40% of it is in a conservation easement, I feel like we treated all 157 acres as if it is. And so I think we did a great, and that was one of the reasons why we did not put the mountain bike trails, and we heard people want them, but we looked at them and we said they're too damaging to the land. They damage the tree roots, they damage the ground. Does Southern Pines want them and need them? Sure, but not on Whitehall. So, I think we stuck to that. That was probably the goal that we looked at first. We cannot do anything that conflicts with that goal in making it publicly accessible and offering passive recreation. So, yes, yeah.
Yes.
We're getting to that in just a second. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the other thing that speaks to the community and the fabric that makes us so special, as there's been tremendous community involvement and tremendous community interest and strong voices, and many of them set before us tonight, and we appreciate you. And I think that we are stronger as a council when we are guided by you. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica, Cindy, for such a wonderful presentation. Now that the council has responded, if there are any public comments or questions, feel free, come right on up.
VIP tonight, it looks like.
Well, I'm all for supporting Southern Pines Town Council and the reservoir and the trails, and kind of whatever is decided, I do support. I just want to make sure our voices of the people who reside in Southern Pines are somehow weighted when it comes to how much would it cost to pave these trails, or how will we, maybe grants or whatever. But I remember some strong voices during one of the meetings, and they were people who don't live in
Right.
Southern Pines. So I just want to make sure we're kind of weighing bike trails could go anywhere in Moore County, really, but anyway.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please, come right on up. Just give us your name and address and
My name is Bill Clemens at 403 Teakwood Lane in Norwood Village. I have a question about the master plan. Could you possibly put up on this thing that big picture of the master plan? Okay. The perimeter trail that you have in red dotted lines, it looks like, that's going to be the impervious surface, okay, but it's going to be a hard surface. You have some red dotted lines going through the center of the, if I may, going through here, around, kind of like a large field, and over in this area. Are those also going to be hard surface trails? Because they're not now.
They're not intended to be. There is that central trail that kind of splits this plan in half, which is this one right here. That may be a hard surface because it helps with emergency vehicle access. That is another way that our fire, our police, and ambulance could get into the middle of the property if they needed to. But all of the other trails that you were pointing out are intended to be soft surface trails, like mulch or something like that.
thank you, sir. Yes, sir.
Vince Colligan, 350 Laurel Road in Southern Pines,
Thank you.
which if you know where that's at, that's in Knollwood Heights, which is directly across the PD Road from the Whitehall parking area and stuff. And so I have one question. Currently, you can ride bikes in the Whitehall area as well as, all the way up to Nix Creek and stuff like that. Are there any plans to prohibit bike riding in Whitehall? Or is that in the works, or is that being discussed? So I don't need an answer now. I just,
We talked about it last week, so I think we do have an answer.
Well, I mean, ultimately, where bikes would be allowed or not allowed is a policy decision, and that can ebb and flow over the years with different councils and decisions. I think there is some intent relative to the harder surface, clearly around the outer portion. You may ultimately be able to get some bikes on that when you start looking at some of the more natural trails and things internal to Whitehall. That's not one that we would likely open up to bicycles, just based upon the ecological reasons that have been discussed in that mountain biking discussion. But it is recognized that this is sort of a connection over to Reservoir, which a lot of people, and if you actually look at the entry drive onto Reservoir on the far left of the path. There's even a bike path envisioned there to get back to the Reservoir parking lot and such. So there is not an intent to write bicycles completely out of this. The slide about not having dedicated mountain biking trails was really just about that. It's sort of the mountain biking stuff that I'm sure you're familiar with.
All right, thank you. The other question is about parking and whether, again, I live right across PD Road from this, so I have a concern turning left out of my neighborhood. If there's a lot more traffic and if any increase of the use of Whitehall is going to happen, have any traffic studies been done or anything to identify where the parking places will be added? There's very few parking places at Elizabeth Rounds, and as well as Reservoir is completely packed. If you go there on a nice weekend, you can't find a parking place anywhere.
Yeah, no traffic studies, but relative to the parking, you had heard discussion of some improvement to where that existing parking is that you're talking about. But quite a bit of parking has been placed actually over off of the Reservoir Drive entryway. One, to alleviate some of the concerns you have relative to PD Road there, but two, also to alleviate some of that parking situation at Reservoir, which on the weekends, of course, can go all the way out to NC 22. The other important aspect of the parking to note, and it wasn't part of this presentation, but council has seen it, is that when Jessica or Cindy talk about a parking lot, don't think of sort of the traditional asphalt with park stops, and it's intended to be sort of amongst the trees and really be as least impactful as possible while still being organized and safe to get in and out of. So it's a little bit different picture than thinking that we're going to put a Walmart parking lot out there somewhere at Whitehall. That's not the intent at all.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Someone else had? Yes, please.
Anne-Marie Clark, 1037 North Lee Street, Southern Pines. Actually, I'm pleasantly surprised by the scale down of the plans and everything else, so I want to thank you for that. For the paving of the trails are enjoyed by people right now as is, and it doesn't cost Moore County anything. Also, what about handicap parking? I went to the house with my car in the afternoon because I'm really tired. I'm handicapped and my dog is handicapped. And I was told, oh no, that's against the rules. So I didn't know there were rules that I couldn't park there for about an hour and go out. And also about the dogs, many of us have dogs that enjoy all the trails, and especially that Greenfield. And when there's no activity there planned, could we have leash-free times, like until 9 or 10 in the morning, so that people enjoy, dog enjoy, and everything else? So
I'll try to tackle those in order, and I'll look to Cindy or Jessica to fill in where I miss. Relative to ADA parking, certainly as those parking lots are created and contemplated, that sort of thing will have to be looked at.
what does ADA mean?
Accessible. And the same thing with that outer trail. One of the big reasons for that outer trail, besides the fire breaks and things that were discussed earlier, is that so that the park can become accessible to people of all abilities. So that will have to be looked at. There will also be, and I don't, this is off in the future when we start talking about the carriage house and the barn and things, But there's been discussion of some limited internal parking up around the carriage house also that could serve as a drop-off for school buses or buses bringing recreational groups or things as schools utilize the property. So all of that will have to be looked at. Anytime a lot is developed, the accessibility issue will have to be taken into account. Relative to the dog issue, and of course, that's been a major point of contention during some of the public meetings, and we've had very strong opinions both for allowing dogs on or off leash and keeping them completely separate. And as was explained, that will ultimately be one of those things that can ebb and flow with policy over the years. As recently as today, Jessica and Cindy and I were in conversation about looking at least something in the interim that might be done. I will be honest with you and say that it may very well be something that is done in the open field area that you reference, because we do have runners and things out there who are some of the people that have concerns with dogs that utilize the trails because they'll connect over to Reservoir and do a large loop. So we're always looking for ways to accommodate as many people as possible. So no guarantees, and certainly open to feedback from the elected officials here and the policymakers, but all of those things are sort of under discussion almost on a regular basis.
Here, I agree with what he said. And we also have talked even to the extent of, for example, at Pawleys Island in South Carolina, there's a time period that dogs can go on the beach without leashes early in the morning. And we've brought that up and talked about whether or not that becomes a compromise. We understand, we hear all of you and we understand, and I have a couple dogs that love an open field, let's be honest, but I also understand that they can scare some people. So be patient with us. And in regard to the house, we have inherited a property that is anything but accessible. The house is something that is not an ADA house. It is not accessible. So I think that your question about parking is noted and appreciated. And part of this is you're going to have to be really, really patient with us and with the, either tell us to go forward with great force and ask us to raise your taxes considerably in order to do that, or let us work through some grants and trying to patiently and mindfully and thoughtfully address all the issues. But the issues that you've raised are not strange issues to the council. We're aware of them, and we appreciate you and appreciate the feedback. So thank you.
I see many people the same day, morning, afternoon,
Right.
with their dogs, and it's fantastic. And there might be one out of 100 who's complaining, and that raises, everybody's ire. But people are wonderful.
We're working on it. We hear you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I believe there was another, yes, ma'am.
I'm Dorothy Brower. I live at 102 Eastman Road, Southern Pines. I am in my family's home on, you might call the backside of Knollwood Golf Course, which is, I consider, in the neighborhood of this property. The public meetings that we had really convinced me that this was a great purchase by the town. Reading it in the paper didn't sort of sell me on it, but after a tour of the property, the house, the barn, the carriage house, and just going down there, seeing what was there and what a family once had, and is very happy that the town has purchased it. It made me very happy that my mom and dad and other neighbors only cut down enough trees in our neighborhood to build the house and kept the other trees up. So I see the woodpeckers. In fact, we have 2 trees in our neighborhood that are designated and labeled for the RCW. And all kinds of creatures enjoy our neighborhood. From my front porch, even sometimes a fox comes through. So I think it's a very good opportunity for Southern Pines to do the right thing, take your time, but also, as you have said, open it up as soon as you can for some low-level activities, and just let us enjoy what we have. And I'm sure others will come because this is very unique. And I applaud you for the work you've done. And I'm thankful that we had the open meetings and the public meetings so that those of us who, from the very beginning, saw the very first one, and I really appreciate what we have in terms of the longleaf pine. I take pine cones to my friends in the Triangle all the time.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, please.
Good evening. My name is Laura Beth Jones. Technically, I reside in Foxfire, but all we really have there is a general store and like some little trails. And I'm speaking today because I'm an occupational therapist and a certified nature and forest therapy guide. And I've had the delight of partnering with the Recreation Department and with the Whitehall property to offer what we call forest bathing experiences, which is a way for people to immerse themselves in nature to receive the health and wellness benefits of being in nature. And I just would like to say that I think this plan is delightful, and I think it's beautiful, and I really appreciate all the intention that's been put into that, and all of the listening and the synthesizing all these community voices. It really means a lot to me. I think it's wonderful. And the only other thing that I would like to say is I'm just wondering, in terms of the meadow space, if maybe we could consider planting some species that would help the pollinators, like speaking for the bees and the butterflies. I think that could really add some value to it, and could also potentially make the property eligible for some type of grant as well, as we're looking to fundraise. So thank you all so much. Really, it's beautiful.
Oh, and thank you for sharing that. Yes. Any other? Yes, please. Come right on.
Good evening. I'm Carla Butler, and I live on Crest Road, not too far from this new product that we have here. I'm happy that you've retained the landscape that you have, that we're going to keep our longleaf pines. I have a question, and that is, what is the benefit of the pecan trees and the fruit trees? I'd like for someone to talk about that a little bit. And also the maintenance of those, because they require heavy maintenance, fruit trees and pecan trees. So that's my question for you.
I'll speak.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe they're already there, but is there someone, you'd like to share, Jessica?
So yes, the pecan trees are already existing to the property. If you go out there, they are to the left of the barn. And so it is a beautiful grove. They are some mature trees. And so we would just like to take care of them, and they need some pruning, some fertilization, so they're a little healthier. And then we'll just leave them in that natural state so that if people want to come and collect pecans, they're welcome to. The fruit orchard would be in addition to the property. And so that is something that it's not something that we're necessarily recommending for an early phase, because fruit trees do take a lot of care, and it requires somebody who's particularly knowledgeable, and you need a lot of those pollinators and things like that. So that's just another enhancement that we can look at down the road, and it seemed to fit well with the nature of the barn and the existing pecan grove.
But I guess your question raises a good point. Just because something is on that big mass does not mean that it's absolutely going to happen. Because I'm with you, like, the resources to do a fruit orchard is just not in the cards right now, because it could be expensive, and then the ongoing carrying costs. So we'll be mindful each time we think about allocating funds for something on that map. And to your point, the fruit trees aren't high on my list at this moment.
Well, and the fruit trees might provide example of, there are opportunities on this site and with this plan to look for partner organizations also. So it could be something that we would get together with an ag group or somebody and bring a farmer in who specializes in that type of thing, that thing could add to I don't know, fall programming on the site, but it's not actually town staff out there trying to figure out how to get the trees functioning, so.
Talking about pollinators, and I know that we need to spray the insects to have fruit trees. And that was a concern.
And I think that maybe you shouldn't have just given us your name and address. You should have told us that you're the president of the local garden club and that you actually know what you're talking about. And we appreciate your expertise, so don't be trying to trap us now. No, we
Up if we decide to go down that path. so.
Right, that's right.
I think we have a consultant we want employed here immediately.
I believe I saw another hand. Yes, please. Would you come up?
Hey, good evening. My name's Mark Smith. I live at 568 Santee Road. And whoever said David Drexel is smiling tonight, he certainly is. 35 years ago, I worked with Ann's husband as a law clerk, and a memo came across my little cubby hole, and it was Bruce. He said, hey, David Drexel wants to start a land trust. That's an organization that holds conservation easements and other interests in property for conservation purposes. Next sentence, what's a land trust? Bruce. And that began me on this 35-year journey about conservation. And so thank you so much for what you've done buying this property for the town and the people in the town. I just wanted to share 3 observations. First, Whitehall offers a great corridor for people who might want to ride bicycles to Sand Hills Community College and live in Southern Pines. If you get on Highway 22 and go up to the traffic circle near the airport and turn left and you're on a bicycle, my gosh, you're taking your life in your hands. And so if some sort of limited bike access, maybe, not a mountain bike trail with moguls on it, but just something a commuting college student can take to get to the college without risking life and limb all that much. It's still possible to injure yourself. I'm proof of that. I've done it many times. But that's observation 1. Observation 2, for parking lots, right here in town, just up the street, East Massachusetts Avenue, where one time I put the brakes on my bike too hard and went over the handlebars, bounced on my head and landed on my feet. And your daughter applauded me after wrecking my bicycle for landing on my feet. But I did that right in this beautiful parking lot at the far east of that school, where the original school building is in the old Southern Pines Elementary School, now the Montessori School. And that is one of the most wonderful examples of a parking lot that doesn't do violence to the landscape. It's been there for 80 plus years, maybe 90 years, and it's beautiful, and it's done so well, so gently on the landscape. Let me urge you to look at that as an exemplar of how a parking lot might look that you might want to add down near the reservoir in Whitehall. Third thing, controlled burning is very important, but as someone who's done a controlled burn out on that site, it's tricky, and there haven't been many burns done out there on that site. And so most of the old pine trees have a foot to a foot and a half of old, what foresters call duff, built up around the base of the trees. And here's what happens if you don't take care. It will smolder overnight and it will cook the base of the root of the tree, and the tree will die. You'll lose some beautiful trees. Out in the Reservoir Park on the Talamore side of the lake, there were 2 beautiful old flat-top longleaf, and when the town first started doing burns out there, that happened to those 2 trees. They leaned over into each other, and they were both dead. And I had a friend who wanted to take a photograph of it and call it Last Dance. It was just a beautiful, sad picture. And so take care out there. I did a controlled burn or helped with one, and there were several older ladies who were in the Moore County Democratic Party, and they knew I was doing a burn. And that little depression over there near the Reservoir Park, it acts like a bowl near the Reservoir Park parking lot. So the burn went off and the flames were extinguished, but the smolders went on all night, and eventually the bowl filled up. And the westward wind blew it across Highway 22 right into the homes of my friends, these Democratic women. And I started getting phone calls at 1 a.m. And I spent all Sunday morning, early morning hours, using a pump sprayer, spraying these smolders. And it probably saved the lives of a lot of these old trees, because around the base, there was glowing, smoldering embers. And so you got to be really careful and have a good forester and a good burn manager out there. And there, I've said my piece. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Marshall.
For sharing.
Really good point that I think that we don't say often enough, which is we all, I think, really need to thank the Drexel family for allowing us to purchase this property. This is not something that went up for sale, that we were competing against developers. They sold it at a price and with the intention of it being preserved. And I think that they've done all of us a great service through that.
There was actually an owner after the Drexels who then sold to the town, so, yeah. So,
Sherman.
Sherman, yeah. And she has contributed information and input to the plan and is at peace with it and really pleased, and I'm sure could have made many times the money she made on the sale of the property.
Yes.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
My name is Joe Black. I live at 1470 Central Drive. Two things. Number one, the last year there's been an uptick in vehicle break-ins at Reservoir Park itself, as well as the one concern for this area and for Reservoir Park itself. Good luck getting a cell phone signal, right? So the second part of that is my property adjoins this park. So for all the other properties too, right, there's a school, there's the park, and there's a church. So with the break-ins at the Reservoir Park and with the other properties, what security measures can we take to, one, boost the cell signal, potentially, and also increase law enforcement? Because with the extra trail and extra park, there'd be more people, that much more access and placement for those potential things to happen.
Yeah.
Great question. We'll follow up.
Yeah. Definitely, I'm sure as more folks start using it, that
Yeah.
Nick
no,
and the police department will add it to their rotation.
And we
hopefully
worked
more
on
so
a
than they
camera
are.
system out at Reservoir, and that's not just Reservoir Park. There's just been an uptick in car break-ins in those types of areas. So yes, we're aware of that, and we were actually, after an incident last week, we were just talking about the cell service issue out there, which again is an issue up and down 22 in many ways, but it'll be particularly a challenge here. So we're already looking at those issues, trying to figure something out.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Morgan Riley. I own property adjoining this property on PD Road. I had two questions. There's the Indian Trail. Is that paved or it's going to be just natural landscape to get to the other parking area? Okay. And then I had a question about the controlled burn as well, just because I had heard been told recently when you do a controlled burn, it makes the landscape come back bigger. So if you have longleaf pines and you're trying to preserve the longleaf pines, that you don't want to really do a controlled burn because the vegetation underneath will grow back more and be good for the wildlife and stuff, but it's not going to be good for the longleaf pines. So just something to think about. Yeah.
I can speak to that.
Would you like to be heard, Mr. Smith?
And we have an arborist still.
I'm Marsh Smith. I still live at 568. And so here's the thing. The longleaf pine has been here for thousands of years. And other than North Florida, we have about the highest lightning strike frequency of any other area in the United States. So the longleaf pine evolved to resist fire. It's got thick bark that's like an ablative heat shield on the old Apollo and Gemini space capsules. And it takes the heat, it insulates, and when it catches fire, it flakes away, takes the heat away. So here's why that's important. Other trees, like holly trees or red maples, they don't have thick bark, and they get toasted by low-intensity ground fires that historically came through here every 3 or 4 years. One could start in Fayetteville and move slowly all the way over here, and it would get rid of the competitors to the longleaf pine. Without fire, these thin-skinned hardwoods outcompete the longleaf and they shade it out. A longleaf pine seed needs bare mineral soil to germinate. If you've got duff this thick, the longleaf pine won't germinate, take root, and thrive. It will die. And so you need periodic fires for the longleaf pine forest to thrive. And although the longleaf pine forest looks like just longleaf pines for as long as you can, as far as you can see, ending at sort of a vanishing point, you look at the forest floor and it's got some of the highest diversity of any forest in the world. It's incredibly diverse, but it's small, interesting little ground cover plants. And the threat to it initially is blackjack, turkey oak, blue jack oaks growing up and shading out the forest floor diversity. Historically, they were low, knee-high scrub oaks. They got big with the suppression of fire, and that started changing the forest around here. Our diversity tanked, and the head-high or higher turkey oaks and blackjacks and blue jacks started allowing predators to get up to the level like y'all were talking about, get up to the level of the red-cockaded woodpecker cavity and get in and kill both the parents and the chicks. So fire actually increases the diversity, and it makes for better longleaf pine reproduction, and it makes for a healthier forest, a much healthier forest. So that's my story. Some of it's true.
Thank you, sir.
I know that.
Yeah. All right. Any other reflections or responses to this conceptual plan? Yes, please. Uh-huh.
As we mentioned, we are moving forward right now with the land management, and one of those steps that we will be doing is those forestry management plans, and the controlled burn is a critical part of that. So we will be working with people who know a lot more than that, and maybe Marsh will be happy to help guide us on that, because it sounds like he knows a heck of a lot. And so we'll be putting those plans together that will guide us on the proper way to do those burns. And we mentioned several times that the trails have been designed in a way to assist with the controlled burns, but there's actually a whole lot of ingenuity that is in this plan. And as those trails kind of snake around, they actually outline areas of about 15 to 20 acres, which is kind of the prime amount of area that you want to do in a controlled burn. So when we develop those plans, we'll know kind of how often we need to, it's kind of every 2 to 3 years, and we'll know which zones we're hitting and which years. And so we'll continue moving forward on that. If you're, familiar with Weymouth Woods, they do a great job out there burning. You can't ever go out there and not see a fresh burn. So, so hopefully Whitehall will look like that soon and have the really thriving pines and ground cover and whatnot. So we appreciate all the thought on that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to continue on with that. Jessica, you were going to mention something about the Freeburg Land Trust up here earlier, and I don't think we got to that. Maybe if you just have a few minutes, their role involved in the approval of the plan concept.
Yes, so they are the ones who hold the conservation easement on about 67 acres there. And they come out periodically and monitor the condition of the land that's in those conservation easements. And there's very strict guidelines and rules on what we can and cannot do in that conservation easement. So we met with them back in January. Matt Kane, our landscape architect, and we met with them, and we literally spread out this plan and we walked through every single element of it. And we talked very specifically about construction techniques and materials. And they actually issued us a written approval saying that we can do these elements and those construction techniques that we've outlined with the pervious paving and the boardwalks and designing around the trees to meander with it. And so as we move forward, we'll certainly continue to work with them and make sure that they continue to be comfortable with it. But yeah, we were very pleased to get their blessing because that was an important step to moving forward with this master plan.
Thank you so much. Again, we really do appreciate your input and all that you've shared. This organic journey is so wonderful to witness. Yes.
And I was just going to say, this sort of cycle goes back to previous councils as well, because it was really 2019 that I think this concept sort of started. So there were council members who were on council then that aren't now, who are just as vital. I think back then we were trying to figure out how to acquire it, and we were able to acquire it without raising taxes and pay for it, which was fantastic. And that was in large part to Ms. Sherman's willingness on the price to work with us in a continuation of the Drexel's plan. So a lot of folks have been a part to get us to this point, so it's really exciting. Did we need to motion to approve this, even though it's not under action? Did you want us to?
After you close the hearing.
Okay. If everybody's spoken, I'll move to close the public hearing on the Whitehall plan.
Second.
Aye.
Okay, is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve the Whitehall master plan as presented by town staff tonight.
Is there a second?
Second.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, we are now maybe 10 minutes?
10-minute break?
Yeah, we'll have a 10-minute break if we go crank back up right at 7:30. Okay.
Don't you remember that first time we went out? I just think remember, this is awesome, but we're gonna have to raise taxes to
Thank you, thank you. All right, it is now 7:31. And we have before us the proposed budget. And if we would, let's open this public hearing.
I'll move to open the fiscal year 23-24 budget hearing.
I'll second if it's short.
Oh, aye. All right, Mr. Parsons?
We can move on. Are we on? Okay. Yes. Members of the audience, both here and online, since we're streaming now, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, it's my honor and privilege to stand before you this evening and present the draft fiscal year 23-24 budget for the town of Southern Pines. I'll begin by thanking all of the individuals that have been involved in the creation of this document. Jessica, you all met at the last presentation along with Cindy, one of the directors. Tess Brubaker-Spees, who's always in the background but came out this evening, and she and her staff are really the boots on the ground on getting all the documents together as finance director. Certainly BJ through the planning office, and all my other directors play a big role in this, as does, of course, the town council. I tried to turn around. I'm glad Jessica did that earlier because you've all heard this enough. So I hope there aren't a lot of
Well,
questions
I was going to
from the
ask
panel.
while we're doing shout outs, let's shout out to Tess.
Yes, I think I
Let's
mentioned
shout
it.
out to Tess.
Got
Who
it.
hangs tough. Yeah.
Okay, so jumping right in, budget process, I think we're all familiar with this now. It's really a year-round process. We are already having conversations about items that we know need to be looked at for next year's budget and whether or not they will look like loans when the time comes, and we're getting pricing on things. And the unfortunate reality of what happened with COVID in the supply chain is there are certain things that just take an awful long time to get, even after you decide to fund them and order them. So we're already in process for next year, and we haven't yet adopted the July 1 budget for this year. But staff development takes place. We do a whole cycle of management review, both one on a couple of management people, followed up by director retreat, where we come to a balanced budget with some available fund balance. And then we spend some quality time together with the board in April to arrive at where we are this evening. Tonight is May 9th. It is your first public hearing. June 13th will represent the second hearing. Historically, if tonight goes well, this presentation will be much shorter next month, but available for questions and such at that time, and certainly any time between now and then. Adoption will come on June 13th, and we enter the new fiscal year July 1. I'm going to jump right into the elephant in the room because it is a unique budget year, and it happens every 4 years here in Moore County, in that Moore County ran around and did a little revaluation of properties last year. And did a pretty good job with it. I know some people weren't necessarily happy with what they saw, but based upon what I've watched happen in the market over the last few years and what I know about options on various properties and things out there, their numbers came in pretty good when you think about it being effective January 1 of 2023. So last year at this time when I stood at the podium, the average home value in Southern Pines was $324,146. If you have read my budget message, and I should back up real quick, there was a residence review available on the table outside. Feel free to grab one of these. If you're online, this is actually already posted, and it's kind of a Cliff Notes version to a lot that I will speak about this evening. This entire presentation, because I know it's not visible online right now, will actually go online tomorrow. So it will also be available. We're going to have some slides that have a lot of print on them. I am not one to stand here and read from a slide. So if you need to go back and review it, I'm just going to hit some bullet point highlights on those slides. It's coming back to where I was on this reval, 324,146 last year. If you read my budget message, you know that the average home and property value for Southern Pines, according to Moore County, is $452,555. For purposes of what I'm about to go through, we're not going to use the 452 because what we're talking about is reval, and that is an aggregation of all values across the town to include commercial property, industrial property, along with residential. So it's the 46% that really matters for these next couple of slides. If you apply the 46% to a 324,146 home, which was average last year with land, it factors out to 473,253. So again, what we do know is that commercial and land values probably increased more than 46% because the actual home value stuff I just gave you is a little less than that. Regardless, it's about tax rate, it's about aggregate value. So we're going to use the 473,253 for purposes of this discussion. So based upon that, if in fact we kept a 40-cent tax rate, did not adjust for revenue neutral, just kept a 40-cent tax rate, and if your property went up that 46% that I just talked about, you'd be looking at an additional $596 in taxes this year. That, of course, is not how we do this. We do actually take a period of the 4 years, we take an average growth rate and factor it out, and we arrive at a revenue tax rate, revenue neutral tax rate. That revenue neutral tax rate, as was discussed back at the retreat, is 28.15 pennies. We round that up to 29 pennies. The reason we round up is that as of conversation last week with Wayne Vest, the Moore County manager, there were 1,400 applications for appeals with Moore County Tax Board. Most of those appeals will end with, no, here's what it is, and people won't see a change. Those that do change, more of them are far likely to go down than they are up, simply because if somebody got a value that was less than what they anticipated or less than what they felt it should be, short of if they thought they were going to use it somehow to sell the property, they're not going to appeal. They'll happily pay taxes on a lower value. Anybody that feels it was artificially high is going to appeal, and there are instances due to just normal error in what the county cannot know when they appraise property, where somebody will come in and say, look, I removed that outbuilding on the back of my property 2 years ago, and you might have had it valued at $40,000, but it's not there anymore. And then they'll have to make an adjustment for that reason. So the reason that we round up from the 28.15 is because in all likelihood, when the county is through with those appeals, the aggregate figure that they gave us is going to be a little bit lower. So again, if we remained at 40, and if you went up exactly 46%, and if you had that average figure that I showed you on the last slide of 324,146, you would pay $596 more dollars. So what actually happens is, with a drop from 40 pennies to 29 pennies, that becomes $1,382. Again, it's a little bit higher because it's the difference between 28.15 and 29, but not nearly the impact, particularly on a home valued at well over $300,000. This entire budget is based on a revenue neutral tax rate of 29 pennies. This slide just gives you an idea of what your estimated town of Southern Pines property tax bill will look like at various housing levels. So if you own a property that is valued at $150,000, that would have been $600 at 40 cents. It drops to $435 at 29 cents. So if you are an individual that just happened to purchase something for $150,000 in December of last year, and the county did not appreciate it effective in January, you actually just saved yourself $165 on your tax bill. Just as an example, we went all the way up to $450,000 on this particular slide. Again, a lot of people might have moved from a $350,000 to a $450,000 home as a result of the appreciation, but this slide just gives you an idea of some of the variations. So looking back on 22-23 real quick.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I know it's me that's going to make it go long. If you'll go back a slide, is that possible? I want to make a really clear point that if you have a house that is valued more, we're not really saving those people more money. We're saving everyone money. I just make sure that that's clear.
Yes.
What we're really attempting to do is the across the board, whether you have a $150,000 or $450,000 house, that you're paying as close as possible to what you paid last year.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Now if I can just go in the right direction. There we go. So again, just looking back a little bit on 22-23, which we are in currently and will remain in until June the 30th. Accountable, transparent, financially strong, community assets, enhanced quality of life, protected citizens. These are the slides that I said have quite a bit of stuff on them, and it'll be good just to review it online if you have an interest. I did want to highlight just a couple of items. We talked a little bit this evening about the Whitehall Master Plan. Actually, we talked quite a bit about it. That has been quite an undertaking this year, very important long-term to the town. We've also had a comprehensive long-range plan that the planning department has been extremely involved in, along with an advisory group, along with a lot of citizen participation through that process. We have not completed that yet, but it's been a big part of this year, and it lends itself to the fiscal year budget in front of you this evening because we have budgeted some money for UDO updates that will come out of the comprehensive planning process. So that was a kind of highlight of the year. Also just wanted to highlight, and this is really great credit to both our resident property owners in addition to Moore County Tax Office. We received in this fiscal year 99.84% of the property taxes owed. That is absolutely fantastic. I mentioned this most years at the hearing, but I have colleagues around the state in other counties, other municipalities, where they literally have to budget based upon an expected receipt rate of about 93 or 94%, because they just simply don't see this sort of compliance nor activity out of their tax collection, be it office in the municipality or if they work through their county. So really fantastic group to work with here in Moore County. Point there on the bottom of the screen, and all the credit in the world to Tess, we did receive our 31st consecutive year of a Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting. So we have been transparent for a very long time, and we're always looking to improve on that. Community assets, we got some great pictures up here, and at this point I should mention, because I didn't when I started, but Jessica did a great job on this slideshow again this year. She and Mike and I met regarding a lot of the content that you're seeing this evening, but she is the Canva master, so really appreciate all of her work on this. Top 3 items here I bulleted for a specific reason. A couple of months ago, I think it was 2, I don't believe it was last month, there was a resident that got up and talked about the community connectors and a memo that we received last year. And I think council is aware that Rachel Mann through the planning office went back through that memo. We provided a pretty detailed response to those items of where everything sort of stood. I think it was probably about a 10-page response, quite honestly. I know Dorothy had sent an email and she left us, but saying that she had received it, but she'd been out of town over the weekend and it was very detailed. So these top 3 items are actually items that came out of that particular memo or letter that was sent to us by the community connectors. The renovation of this building all took place this fiscal year. We are in the process right now of installing a new pool deck, and the top picture on the screen there is exemplary of what that will look like all the way around the pool when it is completed. And Rachel was successful in being awarded a $75,000 grant from the National Park Service toward inventorying West Southern Pines historic assets and ultimately applying for 3 or 4 locations to go on the National Register. So those were all items that were in direct response to or reply to things that came out of that particular letter. And we continue to look at a number of things out of that. Quality of life, some of the numbers are really kind of surprising. 75,000 people passed through the library this year. I know we've had conversations around renovations to restrooms and front doors and things, but that building, believe it or not, is getting more use than it has ever seen. And post-COVID, it really is getting quite a bit. We opened the Whitehall House, which we talked a little bit about. Both the library and the recreation departments have run programs out there. So when you talk about the cooking program, they've had some things out there already. 45 new recreation programs across all age groups. A lot of credit to Cindy and her staff. Great group and always coming up with new ideas and classes fill. And then I bulleted something here at the bottom too. Cindy already mentioned the CVB Year of the Trail activities, which the glass pine cone thing has taken off in ways nobody anticipated. Really cool program. But I could not, and Jessica could not, and whomever else worked on this slide actually list all of the organizations that we as a town partner with in so many ways. This lists more extension service and NC Works and a number of groups, but I could quickly add to that the Southern Pines Business Association, the Chamber, Partners in Progress. There's any number of groups that we're always looking to work with and partner with. The Arts Council, because I know Ray's back here, and the Boys and Girls Club, because John's here also. So always looking to stretch that tax dollar and really enhance the quality of life for our citizens. And then finally, on the protection side, and not to make light of it, because there an awful lot goes on in our police and fire departments. It's the biggest part of our budget. We did achieve a Class 2 insurance rating from the North Carolina State Fire Marshal. That is a pretty big deal. The best you can do is Class 1, and there's 9 classes. So we're at Class 2. Getting to Class 1 involves millions and millions of dollars and another fire station and things that I'm not ready to talk about for fiscal year 24. But that is a big deal, and it does help our residential and business individuals relative to their insurance rates that they pay on their buildings. So great group down there with everything that they do. We led the security operations for the 2022 U.S. Women's Open at Pine Needles, which brought many, many people through the Sandhills. That is a big operation. It really is, and it involves law enforcement from both the federal all the way down to the local level. I don't even want to talk about the details there because it's just an exciting event that people travel to, and there are, the fact that it went very smoothly without any incidents was due in large part to a lot of planning leading up to the event. And the same thing is being undertaken right now relative to the Men's Open next year. We've become pretty good at those types of operations because this area has been blessed to see quite a few big events come through. And then finally, staffed 21 safe community events. These range from parades to First Fridays to protests that have taken place over the past year. But our police personnel in particular, sometimes out there on overtime, sometimes out there as off-duty paid individuals, but we have a lot that goes on. And it goes beyond the police too. Sometimes it's fire and having personnel available. Sometimes it's public works and setting up barricades and safe streets and all of those sorts of things. So the fiscal year 23-24 budget, these are all targets that we've been after for on a year-in, year-out basis for some time, trying to maintain existing services and staff. Debt service is always a consideration, capital projects, talk a little bit about new programs and positions, and then, of course, the fund balance. So our current economic realities, tax base remains very strong. And I note that this hasn't changed a whole lot since last year because both the pros and the cons continue to be considerations. Tax base is strong. I was actually asked earlier today about the anticipated value of the 11 projects. Any of you that have seen BJ Greaves' YouTube video that went viral, at least on a small scale, about the 11 commercial projects taking place in Southern Pines. I was asked by an individual about what the value of that was, and it honestly wasn't a number that we had tried to run previously, and it would have been nearly impossible to do lacking the updated GIS and reappraisal information. But because that is all there, I was able to go in about 10 minutes and assign estimated values to each one of those projects just based upon similarly situated properties in the same area. So those 11 projects actually conservatively could be estimated to be in excess of $120 million. And that's structures, unbuilt structures only, because the land is already being taxed, it has already been valued. So that is just purely placing an estimated value on the structures based upon what we know about those structures and similarly situated ones. So for instance, the new building going up for Pinehurst Surgical, we have information on what the Pinehurst Surgical and Pinehurst Medical buildings have already been valued at. So in excess of $120 million. Again, at $100 million, what does that create? It's real easy math. It's $290,000 in tax revenue. $290,000 and $100 million, these all sound like huge numbers, at least they do in my checkbook. But in the grand scheme of things, it only goes so far.
Reagan, will you say that number one more time, the estimated value?
Yeah, it's in excess of 120 million. I believe the actual figure I ran was 132.5, but again, it's a best guess estimate. Yeah. Rising expenses, don't need to really tell anybody in the room or online about that. We all feel it in our own homes. I'm going to have a couple examples here of how it can really impact the town, though, and how some of our expenses are even far beyond the 8 or 9% inflation figure that we've heard about. Capital project delays. This is getting a little bit better. Is James still here? Yeah, this is getting a little bit better. So we'll see with any new projects that come along. One of the challenges right now in the market is really getting contractors that are available to do work. So some of the materials are becoming more available. Some of the prices are leveling out a little bit. But the availability of contractors and labor continues to be extremely challenging. And my last bullet point there, it's a challenging labor market. And that's not only true for Southern Pines or local governments, it's true of most industries and anybody that's trying to hire out there. But it is definitely costing more to be able to attract people to do the same job that might have been getting done last year. It's just a reality. So again, existing services and staff, along those lines, we've not stopped any services with this particular budget. We are doing a 5% pay adjustment for all employees. We have had to increase starting pay for the police, and any time that you bump that number up, you have to look at your existing staff and make sure that nobody's coming in the door more than somebody that just got here 2 years ago. So we've had to do some internal equity adjustments too. But there is an extreme shortage of people going into law enforcement across the state, across the country. And on top of the shortage of people entering the field, a lot of people are choosing to leave it. So this is a real crisis across the country. We are trying our best to maintain the good men and women that we have and attract additional ones to fill out our force. So I'm not going to tell you that what we're doing with this year's budget will solve the problem. It simply gets us caught back up and hopefully remain competitive until we're not. Debt service payments, we are actually in amazingly good shape relative to our debt. And I'll have a later slide that talks a little bit about specifics on this, but what you see on the screen is everything we've got left right now. So when you talk about the size of budget that we have, past councils, past administrations have been very conservative in the taking out of debt, and it really shows on our bottom line. Capital projects, $1.2 million in street resurfacing. We actually just had our pavement survey update completed. That number's probably going to have to go up in future years, but I will also note that the survey overall came in very positive. We are well ahead of the curve relative to state averages and such, and our roads. But clearly, with some of the infill development and things that we've had, we've got roads that will come due a little bit earlier than not in future years. For police vehicle replacements, I just mentioned $100 million comes out to $290,000 in taxes, and that's before I account for the 2% that our tax collector keeps for collecting. For police vehicles run $240,000 now, so that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense of really what $100 million can generate or not generate, depending on what you thought of that. Sidewalks, $200,000. We'll continue with the Bennett Street work that has been taking place. And then we've got another $100,000 toward the long-term Reservoir Park Dam project. There will be a larger expenditure on that in all likelihood next fiscal year, so 24-25. But this will do a lot of the engineering and planning leading up to that larger expenditure. What's going on out there now is the removal of some trees that the state required us to remove from the dam for safety reasons. Funds new programs and positions. We've had a lot of discussion about garbage and yard debris and all that good stuff, so I will not relive all of that this evening. But we've got $1 million in the budget to address the yard debris issue so that we can hopefully get some competitive bids on garbage and potentially recycling. 6 additional firefighters that, again, will be covered by a SAFER grant from the federal government for 3 years. This was a rarity in that they are covering 100%, or at least 100% up to a particular number. But at the end of 3 years, we will have to then turn around and fund those positions through the general fund. Jessica and Cindy already talked about the Whitehall design and land management item. We've got some playground renovations. These are actually the play surfaces at Downtown Park and at Pool Park. The Downtown Park one has reached sort of its 7 to 10 year expected lifespan on that play surface. The Pool Park one is a little bit shy of 7 years, but unfortunately, the little bit of damage and patching that took place was exacerbated by individuals that decided to exasperate it. So that material is rather expensive, but it is great material from both a fall safety standpoint and thus risk management standpoint relative to our insurers. So, and then of course the long-standing conversation relative to the skate park group, we are going to go ahead and transfer $50,000 into a capital project fund so that when they come forward with their plans and with their matching dollars, we'll be prepared to move forward on that project. Some new positions in the budget. We've got an engineering tech, a communications position, a part-time accounting position, and then some part-time parks and recreation positions. We also eliminated from the budget a previously funded position through combining an IT and a police patrol tech. I shouldn't say patrol, don't think officer, but a tech position that we had within the police department. We're combining with an IT position into one job. So the aggregate expenditure will go down a little bit there. And then, of course, the fund balance, this is 25%. Again, $6.6 million. A lot of money, but again, it also equals just 3 months of operations. So that has been a longstanding policy of the town. It has worked very well as we have gone out for debt, which we will be doing a little bit more of here in coming years. And this budget accomplishes that. So this is just your balance sheet. You enter the year with an available fund balance of $15.6 million. We anticipate bringing in about $22.8 million in revenues in the coming year. We've got a $26.7 million list of expenditures, in addition to $2 million in capital project transfers, leaving an available fund balance of $9.7 million. Again, 3 months of that is 6.6. We have also from that we have also then from the 9.7, I should say, set aside or subtracted what is remaining of what was formerly known as ARPA, not to sound like the artist formerly known as Prince or whatever, but it is now, of course, replacement revenue, and we had committed in the name of transparency to sort of keeping it separate or at least clear as to what was going on there. So we have removed that and not called it available fund balance, which leaves you with an available fund balance moving into July 1 of $491,000. The role of those formerly known as ARPA funds, these are just some of the projects that have been funded through that to date. The Memorial B lights, the Campbell House, the pool deck that I talked about earlier that is underway now, the yard debris trucks that are on order, the pickleball court conversion, which is just about to start, and then, of course, the Whitehall Phase 1 planning that Jessica had talked about, we have put on that balance sheet. So I had mentioned the town facing steeply rising cost. Council's actually not seen these slides, so pay attention. These 6 expenditures actually represent about a third of our budget. It would be easy to stand here and tell you that personnel in general are probably, and I haven't run the number yet this year, are probably 60 to 70% of our budget, which is not unusual. But the interesting thing about these expenditures is we only have so much control over them. The employee pension contributions, of course, you could say, well, have less employees or pay them less, and it'll be less pension, but that doesn't work for a lot of other reasons relative to keeping current services in place. What we don't have control over is the amount of the percentage of pension that goes off to the state, and that has been increasing annually for a period of years now. So that represents about $1.67 million in the budget. Our group insurance, again, we could always offer cheaper insurance at the cost of maybe losing employees or having issues. To the credit of Bruce Rosenberger, our administrative director, this number, while at 1.64 million, and while we have added employees, on a per employee basis, we will be offering an almost identical benefit package relative to the major medical to our employees at a 12.2% decrease this coming year. So he worked very well with our consultant on that, and that was a real help in the budget. General supplies, again, those sort of are what they are. Utilities, everything we do tends to take either electric or natural gas. The phone bill is in there for the offices, but that's another 1.33 million. And of course, those go up at a far faster rate in most cases than any of our water and sewer increases that we ever talk about. Duke Energy is in for an increase right now that it's double digit in some categories, it's 9% in other categories, but that impacts us, particularly when you think about things like the utility budget, the water and sewer. It takes quite a bit of electricity to run a water treatment plant, to say the least. And then we've got lift stations on the wastewater side too that definitely take some electricity. Auto operating and repairs, again, this isn't gasoline, this is literally tires, oil filters, just keeping things running. Sometimes I'll get questions about why we don't keep vehicles longer or why we don't buy used vehicles. Both of those are options, but this figure only grows with either one of those decisions. So it's a balancing act always. And then finally, our property and general insurance. One of the challenges of operations that we have is that we operate not out of a singular town hall or a town hall with a separate police station, but we operate about 13 buildings across the town. Every one of them's got to be insured. So, and again, we're just sort of subject to what the insurance company tells us that will be. So that's $7.25 million of budget there. So what's happened with those things over 3 years? Again, the utilities bills, we've actually done a lot of things to decrease that number because we've changed to, and we're in the process with this current budget of finishing out the changeover, but we've been changing over to a lot of LED lighting. Our street lighting went to LED. So as much as that is an 11% increase, we've also already taken a lot of measures, or otherwise it might have been a 20 or 30% increase over the same amount of time. The auto operating repairs, there you see 41%. Not so much because our vehicles are breaking down more often, although that's been a little bit of a challenge with stuff that was purchased around COVID. But because the cost of oil filters and tires and brakes and all of those types of things have increased rather significantly, quite honestly, at a far greater rate than the 8 or 9% we see in larger CPI figures. And then finally, those pension contributions. Now, again, 72% is a function of a lot of things. It's a function of the increase at the state level of the percentage. It's also a function of COLAs and pay increases and number of employees and all of those things. But it's clearly a very significant jump. And there's no reason to believe with the volatility in the market right now that that we won't see continued increases from the state relative to what the employer needs to pay to make that whole. Treasurer Falwell, to his credit, has done an excellent job of getting the pension, if not fully funded, as closely to fully funded as about any other state in the country. He's done a great job with that. He's done a great job beating down the amount that the pension system pays to the financial advisors and traders and things that make it run. But it is a big cost. Again, just graphically, another way to show our tax revenues are growing. We do have good strength in growth, but they're growing at about 6%. You know, those costs I just went through in the 6 categories have grown at 21%. So this is just, it's always a balancing act, and it's almost impossible to grow your way out of what is happening from an inflationary standpoint right now. You know, the tax revenues, and I'll show this in a pie chart here shortly, but real personal property tax and sales tax, you'll note on the bottom there, that makes up 81% of our total revenues. Just those top two items, the personal property and sales tax, is about 80 of that 81%. So what you do with the tax rate by far makes the largest impact on our revenue stream. And fortunately, sales taxes have remained very strong. This is just a singular example of some of the types of increases I've talked about. And when I say that some of the things that we have to buy specialized have increased far greater than even the types of items that go into a CPI calculation. If you look at those 5 items that are on that sheet, it's hard to argue that a firefighter doesn't need any one of them. But Chief Cameron went back and looked at exactly what he paid to suit up a new firefighter that came in 2 years ago versus what he was pricing out for the 6 new firefighters that will be coming in the door. And it's been a 27% increase in 2 years. And he said 1 year, it literally, they let him know about a 15% increase on a couple of items. And then 6 months later, they said, by the way, it's going up another 12%. It's just the availability of some of this stuff has become a real challenge. Just an idea of some of the things we're doing to manage expenses, and I have mentioned quite a few of these. The health insurance I talked about already, the SAFER grant for the firefighters, the elimination of the position. We are looking at ways to retain our current employees because what we and many other employers are finding that more often than not, if we have to go back out to the market to fill a position of somebody that has vacated, one of two things is going to happen. You're going to pay the new person in the door more than you were paying the old person, or you're going to get somebody with less experience or training or qualification in order to keep the rate the same or a little bit less. So that's a real challenge, and it's very important that we be able to maintain the good people that we have. The other thing we did with this budget, and we had talked with council about this at the retreat, is that the engineering tech and the communications position are both scheduled for hire October 1. So we've foregone a quarter of the year salary. And that's just out of recognition that by the time we advertise and interview and find a good candidate, it's probably going to be that anyhow.
And that number was already reflected in the budget, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes. On the facility and infrastructure side, we are constantly looking for grants, and it is not something we've been terribly successful with in the past for a couple of reasons. One, we're not viewed as a community of need whenever that is a real key grant point. And you hear a lot about Moore County and Tier 3 status, and we fall into all of that. The other part of it, particularly on the utility sides, we have been very successful, and James has been working with our engineers in trying to capture some of these ARPA funds. And we did get a $5 million grant for some sewer system projects that will be extremely helpful. But the other thing that occurred with a lot of the money that flowed into the state on the utility side, if I had mentioned Treasurer Falwell, and there's a little list out there of distressed entities, and the local government commission uses that list anytime somebody comes in for a loan for something. If you're on the distressed entity list, you've got a rough road to go in order to get approval from the LGC for anything. Couple of ways of getting on that list. There are some entities that are there simply because they haven't done an audit recently, which will get them in trouble very quickly. There are a few entities that make it on the list because there's a shortage of auditors in the market, and TEST deals with that situation. Because of the shortage, even if you have one, if they can't keep up with all of their clients, some people just get turned in late. But more importantly, and my point here is, if you look at that list of distressed entities, you will find that the last time I looked, it was probably a third, if not a half. And James, you can correct me, but a lot of them are utilities, and a lot of them are rural utilities. So when the ARPA funds flowed into the state of North Carolina and the legislature started to set up grant programs and things for utilities, they actually moved them toward funds to help distressed utilities. Now, we can have a long debate about how much sense that makes, because there's various reasons for distress, but we do not tend to qualify for an awful lot of the programs that are out there, because I've shared with you the dashboards that get done that sort of show what people pay in various areas and things. And our rates, while they have increased, and while I'm not going to suggest they're cheap, they are relatively low around the state of North Carolina, and yet we remain in good financial standing. So again, it's the old, we don't qualify for the grants because we don't show the need in order to do so. The $1.2 million in streets is actually a move to try to save money long-term, because if we don't take care of the streets on a regular schedule, we end up having to rehabilitate them instead of resurface them, which drives the price of that up 3- and 4-fold. So it's more money now, but it's to forego a whole lot of money in the future. The LED lighting I mentioned, the facility maintenance is there. Again, with Whitehall, getting those drawings done is about being able to go out and hopefully find some money for the construction. And the bottom one there, you'll all appreciate, because we've been in both this building and the Haney Room. And let me tell you that if you have an office building anywhere in town, whether it's the library or my building, you've experienced HVAC failures. We do have a new buildings and grounds superintendent. He has gone out and sought out a proactive preventative maintenance program. I will not stand here and guarantee you that we won't have a problem, but I like our chances a lot better than where we have been in the past. So what can the residents expect with this budget? Again, the property tax rate will drop 11 pennies. That average TOSP tax bill, Town of Southern Pines tax bill increase of $15.84, again, is just looking at average home value in 2022 versus average home value according to the county in 2023. At 29 pennies, that 2023 value will pay $15.84 more annually. Waste fee increase of 25 cents to $17. This was a big topic of conversation, you'll recall, at the retreat. That was going to go under our previous 60-40 sharing model to a little over $20. So that is actually a $3 savings from what people would have paid had we just maintained the same 60-40 split of general fund revenues versus what gets charged off on the utility bill. Also noted there, curbside collection will begin on July 1. So if you are somebody still utilizing the backdoor service, enjoy it for another 50 or 60 days. But on July 1, it has to be at the curb to be picked up. And then finally, on the water and sewer side, for the average customer using 5,000 gallons of water a month, a 4% increase to both the base and the consumption rate per thousand for both water and sewer will amount to $2.93 a month if you are a user of 5,000 gallons. General fund revenues, this just goes back to the earlier conversation. You see the dark green and the light green represent property taxes and sale taxes, and that's 80% of all of our revenues. Probably the thing that went up by the largest percentage is just our investment earnings, and that's because you can actually earn interest on certificates of deposit and other financial means these days that haven't been there for a number of years. Where does a dollar go? So for a dollar of taxes, 39 cents is going to public safety, 38 to general government, and the next slide will explain what that is. 11 cents to culture and recreation, 6 cents to transportation, and 6 to economic and physical development. So for that average taxpayer bill of the $400,000 home, $1,312. $511 is going to public safety, and you can read the rest of it. I will note general government is the only one that's not self-explanatory, I think, on this list, unless you don't recognize cultural and recreation as library and recreation. But on the general government, it is important to note that's the legislation, it's the administration, and it's all the stuff that supports all the other departments, the IT, the finance. In addition, it is the sanitation contract, and it is the maintenance of all of the fleet regardless of division. So when you see general government, it sounds like a sinking fund or something, but it's actually all the stuff that makes the other four things able to function.
Is there a chance that, I'm really far away, is there a chance that, thank you, that we could, not now, obviously, not even before, thank you, but between now and next year, can we look at this and like the dollar bill that was divided up, essentially, yes, like how this compares to other towns about our size, just to see how our expenses align with other places. And I know it's going to vary because we have our water plant and we have our library. But if we can just choose a couple towns and then talk about why ours are different or the same, I think it might be a nice enlightening point for all of us.
I can try and
Don't do it now.
find a database along those lines. What I will caution, not caution, but what will make that more difficult than maybe it sounds is not everybody categorizes exactly the same.
Okay.
Public safety is, I think, going to be pretty straightforward. Depending on how they do their internal accounting, they may charge things off through some internal funds and stuff, but
Okay.
I'd be happy to look for some benchmarking type stuff just
Okay.
to see what's out there.
Yeah, I think it might just be nice moving forward in future years to have.
Yeah.
Thanks, Reagan.
Water and sewer operations, I think I talked about already, but again, here's some of the more specific. The 2158 base rate is an 83-cent increase. Again, that's for water and sewer, and that's if you don't use anything. That's an availability fee. That's, as a customer, that's what you will pay if you went on vacation for the month and didn't turn the faucet on. You're looking at 2158. But the $2.93 is there again also. Our debt, again, very good shape. Really important to note that the first two items on this particular picture, the police station and the Whitehall purchase, are done in fiscal year 23-24. So you will not see those on this slide or any similar slide come next year, which is very nice. We got another year on the existing fire engine, and I'm going to come back to that in just a second. And then, of course, you got the fire station and the community development building. Items that I foresee going onto this over the next couple of years. We're familiar with the Parkway scenario, but there is an MSD in place, a municipal service district, to help fund with that. Beyond that, we are due on both a fire engine and a ladder truck in the coming years, and I'll talk about the engine here shortly. And then we're going to have some building upgrades to do with both the old library or current finance building, the administration office. We've got some structures that are due for some internal help, and that will probably be in the form of a loan when it's all said and done. I wanted to point out this fire engine because that $650,000 issuance a couple years back was in fact the purchase price of the fire engine. So in 2021, we bought one of these at $650,000. Chief Cameron spec'd the exact same truck, because we actually like to purchase very similar equipment. It makes it easier on the fleet garage, we can keep the same spare parts, all those good things. He spec'd the exact same truck in anticipation of maybe getting it ordered in this fiscal year. And it came in at about $990,000, and that's if we paid it up front. And by the way, the delivery time on it was 24 to 26 months. So when I said we're already talking about next year's budget and planning ahead, this is one of the big items that we're taking a look at how to handle that. We're hoping that it's always a little over a year, particularly with a ladder truck, to get those built out and delivered, but 2 and 3 years, he priced the ladder truck to, and there you see it, $2 million. We purchased the last ladder truck for a little over $700,000 in 2005. Fortunately, they do get quite a few years, but they have gone up significantly in price, and the lead time on that truck when he priced this a few months back was 36 months. So again, what we don't want to do is wait 2 years, find out it's going to be 2 more years to get it delivered, and then those auto operating costs, because the difficulty is, right now, we have one ladder truck. When it goes down or it's in a shop for some reason, that is a very valuable piece of equipment we just don't have access to. And it's actually a piece of equipment that there aren't a lot of them rolling around Moore County. Aberdeen happens to have one, fortunately, to our south. But when on the rare occasion, fortunately rare, that a large fire occurs, it's all hands on deck through mutual aid, and you like to have more than one ladder truck if it's a big industrial building or something. So this is just an example of some of the things that will be coming down the pike. positioning ourselves then for next year. I think I've kind of beat this to death a little bit, but we'll continue to look at the aging facilities and other infrastructure, any desire for enhanced services or facilities. We'll probably continue to struggle with a tight labor market. There's nothing demographically or actuarially that makes me believe that that is going away anytime soon. We are increasing revenues from growth, which is fantastic. Hopefully some of this inflation and things comes down, and hopefully the borrowing costs start to come back down again. I don't think we're going to get to the point of seeing 1.91 or 2 anytime real soon, but hopefully they'll come down before we get into some of these larger loans and projects. And then it's just the delicate balance of rates and fees and taxes, and then the services that if we want to discuss potentially reducing or eliminating to make these budgets work on an annual basis. And with that, I will simply say thank you, take any questions from council, and allow the Mayor Pro Tem to open up the floor for questions.
First, council, any questions?
I'll just say thank you for doing that. And it was really important to not raise taxes, and so to stay at that 29% rate so that most citizens did not see that major increase in taxes was super important. It was hard, and I know we spent a long time fighting for it, but I appreciate your willingness to work with us so that we could keep that revenue neutral. And, it means you can't say yes to everything, but I think we all felt it was important to not raise taxes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Echoing Councilmember Pate, thank you for your day of flexibility, for adjusting to make sure that we did get to that 29%. I really appreciate the work that Tess put into it, and Jessica and you did the day of it. It really, I think, is going to make a big difference for all of our residents. So thank you for that. One comment. Yes. It's labeled a couple different places as rainy day fund. I feel like it's like a hurricane day fund. I want to make sure. Yeah. I just want to make sure it's really clear. Yeah. It's not, if something bad comes along and we just kind of need some money, it really is emergency use funds, and that's what it's intended for. So I just want to make sure that anyone watching this here or online, or that has this sheet, understands that is the recommended limit for us to have cash on hand.
Yeah, and the one instance that I can recall that if that wasn't dipped into, it was terribly close, was with a hurricane. And, it's true that oftentimes those get declared as disasters, and there is FEMA reimbursement involved, but the last series of hurricanes that came through, it took us more than 3 years to see all of the reimbursements. So had we not had cash on hand, and there's you can go back and double check the pilot, but there is a local example of where Robbins had a very significant pump go down with one of the hurricanes that came through, and they did not have the cash on hand and had to go out and struggle to get a loan, and because it wasn't something they could just simply operate without. So it's very important to have on hand. It also really, really helps when we go out and do have to let debt for anything.
Anyone else on council? Hey, anyone? Public like to share? Ask any questions? All right, hearing none, we'll move right ahead. Let's close this particular public hearing.
I'll motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. All right, now for the action items, the first of which, 2 vacant planning board positions, one ETJ, the other in town. I'm sorry?
You know that we have Mr. Earp here.
Oh, yes. Yep. Oh, yeah. I was talking to them earlier. Thank you.
I'll just say, I may let y'all make the motion because y'all knew the individual for that one, but I appreciate the citizens who put names in for, we had the pleasant, not surprise, but just a pleasant opportunity to have multiple people apply for these positions. Usually we're begging people, trying to find like one planning board, ETJ, one in town. We had multiple names for both positions, which was fantastic. So continue to encourage all of our citizens to apply and become active in Southern Pines. If y'all want to make that motion, though.
Is this a motion you'd like to make separately or one motion for both people?
Maybe, yeah.
Just one.
One motion for both.
Would you like to? Would you? Okay. Okay, I would like to say thank you to all the applicants. It really is a pleasure to be able to choose between very qualified and caring individuals. That being said, I would like to make a motion to, I guess, reappoint Andy Bledgy to the ETJ position on the planning board and to appoint John Earp for the in-town position on the planning board.
Second.
What is the pleasure of council?
Okay. Mr. Earp is here?
Earp is here.
Say anything? Don't feel pressured, I know this. Then don't, it's okay.
I'm very thankful and I'm very appreciative. I love this town and support it in any way I can. I'm very proud that you consider me to be somebody that's qualified to be part of the planning board. I would do everything possible to support it. By the way, I live at 815 East Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would also like to just recognize for the record Mr. Gary Carroll, who served 2 complete terms on the planning board, including a stint as the chairman, and that's who John will be replacing on the board, so.
Yes.
Those are big shoes to fill, and you will do it. That's great, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll, if you're listening in. All right.
I bet he is.
Okay. Now the consideration for Creston Commons, the request that they have to improve.
Yes,
I don't think there's anybody here.
it's an architectural compliance permit. You guys will recall, we looked at it at the agenda meeting. It was
Right.
most of the replacement of the siding. That was the only issue. It was non-compliance. It was going from vinyl siding to a hardy plank siding. We looked at the entire project. It's a rehabilitation of all of the structures. Again, if you would like me to, I can certainly go through the PowerPoint presentation again. Otherwise, again, normally we look at it at the agenda meeting and then we have regular meeting. You guys, questions, anything like that?
I think just, does anybody from the public have any input? Was one of the reasons we said we wanted to bring it up and discuss it this evening, if there was any input from the public.
All right, seeing none, they make a motion.
Yeah, I'll move seeing as how all of the staff report contained all of the variations and approvals, I'll just make a motion to approve AR 0423 as contained in the staff report.
I'll second.
Pleasure of the council.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, thank you. And the final action item tonight is the consideration of the architectural rendering for the American Whiskey Company. I know we heard comments earlier. We are grateful for those comments, and we'll make sure, but there are health boards and people in place to take care of those things. But for the architectural review,
Right.
Reagan, do you have any recommendation on how we can monitor and enforce potential?
Honestly, it's an item that probably was best addressed back at the conceptual development plan versus an architectural review. That being said, certainly any monitoring, anything of that nature would be out of the health department more so than the town. But all of that being said, and I don't want to put words in anybody because I just kind of walked by, but it sounded like Mr. Smith, on behalf of the applicant, was having a conversation with Ms. Tussing, and I imagine there's going to be some follow-up conversation about that. I will say, and I think BJ will agree, the Haulings have been great to work with up to date and have been very good. So if this is something they haven't heard of, I'm sure they'll be interested in it. And I certainly cannot commit that they're willing to put in ethanol removal equipment. If it's inexpensive, I can't imagine they wouldn't, but I won't pretend to know exactly what that consists of. But I think I have to believe there's reasonable conversation in follow-up to the concerns that have been expressed this evening.
Make sure that we make a note to follow up with the health department on that.
Yeah.
Okay. And with Mr. Smith, would you like to make a comment? Or is that something that you'll?
Well, I'll make the comment that I talked with the Hollands earlier tonight, and they want to do whatever they can to make sure that this gets addressed properly.
So at architectural review, let me ask a question that is going to sound like I'm way out there, but there's no way to make, I mean, this is all new to us, and I thank you for bringing it up, but if ethanol catching equipment is something that needs to be addressed, I'm not really comfortable with saying, well, if they can do it, they can do it. If they can't, they can't. But it is a risk to the community. But I also don't know that the place for that is at architectural review, which is the problem. On the other hand, as a council member, I share your concern. You've just taught me something new, however, and I am certainly not well-versed on it, but it's a concern that I have, and I do understand historically that the owners of the property have been fabulous to deal with, and Mr. Smith, your reputation precedes you. You were also fabulous to deal with. So I'm hoping that with all these honorable people involved, we make sure that we really do keep ourselves from some future concern. And I'm not sure how to do that. I mean, I'm really uncomfortable with moving forward on something about which I know nothing, except for the 3 minutes that I think it's been a very important issue raised by a constituent. So.
And I won't argue otherwise relative to the importance of it. I will offer that I don't believe it, and I don't think you're arguing it is, that it is an architectural item. It is also something that would likely be addressed through the building code and/or a health department regulation. And that may not exist in North Carolina because, as she stated, this is kind of new business to the state of North Carolina.
Right.
It wasn't very long ago the legislature even opened this sort of thing up. I went straight to the ethanol removal equipment because that seems like an add-on type thing. If I understood the presentation correctly, one of the and I'm not going to suggest it was said this fixes it, but I thought I heard that closed rick houses were better than the open air, which these are closed at the very least, as we can see now with the architecture. And I don't know if you'd seen the architecture before this evening.
We also heard that number of barrels was an issue. And so valid point about which I know nothing.
And and I don't know if the medium comment came out of potentially the newspaper article. This is clearly a very small scale or craft type of distiller, but I won't sit here and pretend to know that 10 barrels means better than 100, means worse than 1,000.
I agree. I agree. So I think that it's fair to say, and I don't know whether everyone joins me with this concern, but I think it's fair to say that it is a very real concern on the part of the council now that the issue's been brought to our attention, and that we hope that the owners will make every effort to address that concern.
That sounds about right, but let's see, as far as the architectural review, what would be the consensus? What would be the?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. This concern, we'll hopefully figure it out, but not an element to hold the architectural review hostage. So given what we've gotten in the staff report, I will make a motion to approve AR 06-23.
Second.
Pleasure of the council.
Nay.
Aye.
Thank you so very much. That brings us to the end of this business meeting. And any other?
Is there a chance, Reagan, that we could have a date on follow-up with health department, just checking in on? Okay.
Thank you. All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Go home.
Wait, well, that's going to need a
Thank y'all
second.
so
Which one of you counts as a second?
Bill seconded. He
Bill
said it
seconded,
first.
okay. All right.
Aye.
I know, he's always on it.